As a reader, it is so disheartening to read a book that you're hoping to enjoy or you've heard good things about, it's been super hyped, and then you get to it and you realize, whether very quickly or not until the end of the book, that it's just not for you. Those books, I think, are just as important to talk about as the ones that we absolutely love. First of all, because I think it's important to be able to articulate what we like and dislike about books in the full range of enjoyment, which is why I make this video every year. So today we are going to be talking about my least favorite, biggest disappointment books of 2025. Before I get into it though, I do want to make the disclaimer that if I've listed a book on this list that you absolutely love, it's okay. This is my subjective opinion. These are books that I personally didn't jive with for whatever reason, and if you do, that's awesome. Let's start off with a classic, shall we? The Princess Bride by William Goldman. This one surprised me a lot. I went into this book kind of anticipating just a really fun, nostalgic, classic read. I grew up on the film Princess Bride from the time I was very, very young and loved it. I absolutely loved the film. So going into this book, I was expecting not a one-to-one same thing, because obviously a film is a very different medium from the written word, but I was expecting to have at least somewhat of the same experience in terms of emotional investment and the nostalgic, whimsical joy that the Princess Bride always elicited in my younger years. Now imagine my surprise when I got into this book and I discovered that this is so incredibly different, in my opinion, than the film is. There are a couple of things in here that I appreciated getting more of. There's more of Fezzik's backstory in here, a little bit more of Inigo's backstory, that sort of thing, and I loved that part of the book. However, there's a lot of cutaways in The Princess Bride that I was not anticipating, where William Goldman kind of goes a little bit meta with his story and basically starts breaking the fourth wall and talking about this, that. It kind of felt like a way for William Goldman to describe how smart he was by, oh, I'm pretending to be a different author who wrote this book back in the day. And while that doesn't sound bad on first impression, it broke away from the actual story so much, and it just felt kind of egotistical to me personally. The other thing that really bothered me about The Princess Bride was, like, the Count and Prince Humperdinck, like, they're creeps in the movie, right? We all expect that, and we know that they're not great guys. That being said, in the book, they are so much grosser, especially the Count. The Count has some very inappropriate thoughts about Buttercup in, like, the first part of the book, and his wife, I didn't even know he had a wife, but apparently he has a wife, had the same kind of inappropriate direction thoughts with Wesley as they go out to the farm to meet both of these two young people. And I just didn't sign up for that at all, and it really made me super disappointed, because I honestly was expecting to just have a great time with this book, but by the time I got about 30% in, I was already ready to put it down. And unfortunately, because this was a buddy read or a book club read, I did end up finishing it, because I try really hard to make the commitment that I am going to read the entire book if I can. I really did not enjoy my experience with this book, and I was so annoyed by it. I was so annoyed that I made an entire dedicated video to talk about how annoyed I was with The Princess Bride. So if you want my more articulate and in-depth thoughts on that, please go watch the video, because I kind of go a little bit more detailed into what it was exactly that I didn't like about it, and the specific scenes in question that really turned me off of the story overall. So yeah, this one was unfortunate, because I was definitely ready to get a little bit of that childhood nostalgia back with The Princess Bride, and it really fell flat on its face. The next one is one that I wanted to include on here just so I can say one more time how bad it is, which is really probably kind of mean, but here we are. So this was a book that I didn't anticipate enjoying very much. I kind of went into it expecting It's probably not going to be great, and that is A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. Now, I'm a massive fan of The Hunger Games. It's still one of my favorite YA series of all time. I have very fond memories of going to the films when they first came out, and this one, I really don't understand this book. And what I mean by that is I don't understand what the thought process was going into writing this book. Because President Snow, we all know, is this horrible villain with this undertone of tense mystery, and he's kind of terrifying in a really subtle, I completely have control of everything kind of way. And in the original trilogy, that is such an intriguing villain portrayal. And of course, in the films, Donald Sutherland is amazing at portraying him. However, in the book, I found myself at the end of the story kind of asking the question, how on earth did we go from whoever this is to President Snow? Like, what I was expecting is to see some kind of trajectory seeded into the story that was going to show us the man he was going to become. And I don't feel like it did that at all. And I know there's a lot of conversations around BookTube and around films in general about how whether or not making a villain more sympathetic is always the right choice. And for me personally, I think this is an example of when it really isn't. Because really, she created a completely separate character, in my opinion. And the Snow of Songbirds and Snakes was unrecognizable in a way that didn't work, right? There should have been, even if he started out as a quote-unquote great guy, which he didn't, but better guy, there should have been something. There should have been something that made me go, huh, yeah, I can see how he would get to this point. Because otherwise, I'm not entirely sure what the point of the story was, if I'm being totally honest. And not only that, we went back to District 12 again. It's like there's 12 districts, and I would love to see something not in District 12 at some point. That would be great. However, it also kind of did a character assassination of a couple of the characters from the original trilogy. Snow obviously being one of them, but there's a minor character in the original trilogy that this book completely trashes everything we learn about them in the original trilogy, which was so frustrating to me because you guys know character assassination is one of my biggest pet peeves in writing ever. So yeah, I mean, this one wasn't really a big surprise. If I'm being totally honest, I kind of knew going into it, I'm not going to enjoy this book very much. And I really did try. I did think that the idea of going back to the first days, the very first days of the Hunger Games and what society looked like, even in the capital at that time, was a really interesting premise. I just think the execution of this book was absolutely deplorable. Now, the good news about this is that Sunrise on the Reaping, which is the new book that just came out about Haymitch and his quarter quell, was phenomenal, in my opinion. And it's not a perfect book, but it did everything I was hoping that it would do, and it didn't ruin Haymitch for me, which was a much higher experience than the one I had with Songbirds. All right, next up, and I know you guys have heard me talk about this a lot this year, so I will do my best to keep it succinct. Howling Dark by Christopher Ruocchio. I had the goal, it was one of my priority series for 2025, was to start Sun Eater. I wanted to get at least 2 books into the series, and I ended up reading Empire of Silence, The Lesser Devil, which is a novella in between book 1 and 2, and then Howling Dark. Now, I actually had kind of I think, community minority opinion of having a pretty decent time with book 1. And then everybody told me, oh, just wait until you get to book 2, and then it is going to sink its talons into your soul and never let go. And it certainly did, but not in the way that I think everybody was anticipating. Now, when I'm talking about this book, please understand that I recognized very quickly that Ruocchio is absolutely brilliant when it comes to world building, science fiction world building, especially in the alien cultures and linguistics of the story. I was absolutely blown away by those. I think that he has an incredible talent in that area, and that is really hard. You can write aliens, but I feel like it's a completely different, deeper skill set to make them feel alien. In so many science fiction books or even fantasy novels that I've read, a lot of the creatures or aliens just kind of feel like slightly modified humans, and there's not really that much of a difference. And I've only come across a couple of authors, especially in sci-fi, that make me really believe I am looking at something completely inhuman. And Rocchio did that in spades with the Cielsen. And not even just the Cielsen, but there's a couple other alien races mentioned in the books that also just felt very, very alien and non-human, which I thought was brilliant. So that's my preface to all of this. When it comes to the character development in this series, that's where I really fell off the wagon very, very hard, very, very fast. Because I feel like everything that was set up in book one was completely thrown away for book two in so many ways. And there was a lot of sacrificing character arcs for plot, where something needed to happen in the story. So a character would do something that was completely outside their character setup through the last, sometimes 2 books, in order for the plot to be a certain way or for a certain scene to happen a certain way. And it happened over and over and over and over again. And the thing is, I think that the very ambitious choice to make this a first-person narrative, where we are only getting the story through Hadrian's point of view the entire way through the series, I think. I've heard some rumblings through the grapevine that we might get some like tiny flashes of other characters later on in the series. I don't know. But for the most part, it's Hadrian, and you're stuck in his head. And man, let me tell you what, that is a place I couldn't wait to get out of. And part of that, you know, is the quote unquote, it's intentional. Fine. And I think that's a really ambitious choice. But I also think it makes Hadrian less interesting, and it makes all of the other characters around him not redundant or pointless, but kind of, because Hadrian likes to think about himself the most. So we don't even get much of the other characters deeply from his point of view, which is kind of weird for being stuck deeply in his psyche for 2 books, because he's not the protagonist of The Lesser Devil. But anyways, yeah, I really struggled with Howling Dark, you guys. I really struggled with it. And I've said before that I'm not opposed to going back and trying Demon in White at some point and just trying to pick up the series again. It was exhausting trying to get through this book, and it just about put me into one of the worst reading slumps I've had in the last few years. And again, like I said, I think Rocchio is brilliant in a lot of areas of writing, and I can completely understand why people love this series. But as a character-first, always reader, this really, really did not work for me, and I got very, very frustrated with all of the things. Because it's telling a very epic story, right? We have lots of time jumps where we're covering hundreds and hundreds of years through this series, and I get that, and that's fine. But I think where I was really struggling is we're focused so much on the things that are happening that the characters are just sort of dragged along as vehicles to hold up that plot and that world building, which did not work for me. So that is my final word on Howling Dark for the year. And if you want to see more of my thoughts on that, please go watch my video where I articulate in more detail, if you have read the book and want more spoilers than that. But yeah, I don't know. This one really disappointed me because, like I've said before, nobody was more surprised at how I felt about this series than I was. This one pains me. This one pains me to hold up because never in a million years did I think I'd be sitting here holding this book up in a biggest disappointments video of 2025. But I'm going to do it. House of Chains by Steven Erikson. What is happening? What How did we get here? How did we get here? This is one of my favorite series of all time, and I 5-starred this book 12 years ago. 12 years ago? Something like that. I loved this. I loved this book. I loved the series. There is a character arc that comes from one of the earlier books in the series that kind of comes to a head in House of Chains that is one of my favorite things I've read in fantasy literature. So what are we doing here? It's a great question. Anyways, so House of Chains. I have been really enjoying my reread of Malazan. I absolutely loved rereading Gardens of the Moon, book 1, and I actually rated Gardens of the Moon higher on a reread than I did the first time around. Dead House Gates. It is my favorite fantasy novel of all time. I 5-starred the crap out of that one again. Memories of Ice. You know, I still enjoyed it about the same as I did the first time. So when I got to House of Chains, I was flabbergasted to get like a third of the way into this book and realize I am not enjoying this at all. Like, I can't wait to be done with this book. What is happening? You know, without spoilers, there's only so much I can say because Erikson has so many layers and there's so many things going on. Honestly, for those of you that haven't read the series yet, I could probably tell you exactly why I had trouble with this book, and you wouldn't have a clue even if you go to read it later. It is so slow. Now, Erikson, I don't think, would ever have the reputation of being a fast-paced author. That's just not the type of story he's telling, and that's fine. This one feels like an absolute drag. Apparently not on the first read through, because I didn't have that experience back in the day when I read it for the first time. But this time, it was so incredibly slow. It was so slow. The character arcs felt kind of muddy, and like the whole plot line felt incredibly disjointed, which surprised me a lot because I remembered this book having a more clear direction than I experienced with my reread. And that was very sad to me. I just really did not enjoy my experience rereading this book. Even the scenes that I love from the specific character arc that I mentioned earlier, they were still good. They still hit. They did not hit the way that they did the first time through. And I think by the time I got to those at the end of the book, I was so mentally exhausted by this installment of the series that I just couldn't handle anymore, and I didn't have any emotional investment left to give. So it wasn't that character arc diminished in any way, but the rest of the story just, like, even right now, as I'm thinking through trying to pick out scenes in my head of exactly why I didn't enjoy this as much, I don't even know that I could tell you what happens in this book right now. Like, I'm remembering tiny bits and pieces. The first part of this novel is Stephen Erikson's rebuttal to someone who once said that he couldn't stick with one specific character for any length of time. So the first section of this book follows one character and really digs into their culture and their story. It's not super pleasant to read. However, it is phenomenally well written. So that first chunk of this book was, I think I appreciated more on the reread, even though the character we're following is seriously abhorrent in most respects. After that, the book sort of died a very slow, painful death for me, which was a big bummer. Now, I was a little worried at the end of this book that going into Midnight Tides, book 5, which will be my first time ever reading that, I was very worried. I was like, I don't know, like, am I going to have this experience with another book in the series? Because I don't know if I can handle that. And I would love to update you on the fact that I am into Midnight Tides about 100 pages now, and I'm really enjoying it. It is phenomenal. So all of the critiques and frustrations that I had with House of Chains, I am not finding in Midnight Tides, which has been a relief, I have to say. Next up was the sequel to a book that I 5-starred at the beginning of this year. Absolutely loved. Curse of Shalion by Lois McMaster Bujold. Brilliant book. Oh my goodness. Brilliant book that is underrated and not enough people are reading it, so please go read that book. It can be read as a standalone, but in the World of the Five Gods, which is the series that Shalion takes place in, there are 2 follow-up novels called Paladin of Souls and The Hallowed Haunt. So I read Paladin of Souls a few months ago, and I went into that expecting, just more Bujold amazingness. And don't get me wrong, she is an absolutely beautiful writer. Paladin was such an underwhelming book for me. And I think it's a much more intimate, deeply focused journey of one specific character than the first book is. The first book still follows a main protagonist, but I feel like we're getting more from the cast overall than we do in Paladin of Souls, which on the surface is completely fine with me. I love a good deep character study. And actually, the main protagonist of book 2 was a side character I found incredibly intriguing in book 1. And this one is kind of confusing for me because, like I said, it's really well written. Bujold is a beautiful prose writer. Her world building is very subtle but very ethereal and immersive. The main character in this book goes through a very dark kind of religious journey / supernatural journey throughout the story. And I think there's a lot of things in here that are thought-provoking, that are very interesting, that Bujold wanted to explore and did so in a way that wasn't always bad, in my opinion. However, there were so many little things. There were so many little things in this book that frustrated me. It kind of bothers me when an author we suddenly have this female character who has magical abilities or has some kind of tie to magic, and it's introduced so often as being inherently sexual. And that really annoys me because I'm like, of course it has to be because we have a woman. We can't just have normal, oh, she has magic too. How is that being used in the world? And how else could we figure out to introduce that? Which is frustrating. I don't always hate it, and I don't think it's always the wrong choice, but I think in this book specifically, it just sort of soured my experience with the book as a whole. And honestly, there wasn't even that much of it. There was just a few instances that really frustrated me and kind of put me off of the rest of the story. And overall, I just didn't care as much about the characters as I did in Curse of Shalion, which really frustrated me. Because I wanted to, but I didn't. So, anyways, I highly recommend Curse of Shalion, and I know a lot of people that love Paladin of Souls even more than Curse of Shalion, and so don't take my word for it. I definitely recommend reading Bujold. She's got a lot of incredible books, so you might like it more than I did. That's completely possible, but that was just my experience. Last on my list is another book that I had picked as a possible 5-star read for me this year, and I'm still kind of in shock that it really wasn't. This is my first time reading this author. He's been on my TBR for ages, and I finally picked up Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. A lot of people, and I have to be careful how I talk about this, because otherwise I will definitely get yelled at in the comments. I was told, like so many people are, that you need to go into this book completely blind. And I think for a lot of people that's probably true. I know a lot of people have had really good experiences with this book when going into it blind, so I'm not doubting that at all. For me, I actually was kind of spoiled for a major element of this story earlier on, before I read it, and I don't know that it really changed how I felt about the book that much, if I'm being totally honest. Because I did think about that at the end when I put it down and I was really disappointed. I was like, did that make a big difference? I honestly don't think it did. I think I would have DNF'd the book earlier had I not known that that element was there. That was just a me personally thing. I'm not going to say that I had strong expectations because I do try to go into books just letting them be what they are as much as humanly possible. And while I do think the people that talk about the way this book is read really fitting with the themes and what Ishiguro is trying to explore thematically here, I don't even know what the right words to use on this book are. I was going to say that it was a lot quieter and more subtle, more slice of life than I was anticipating. Which is true, and I don't necessarily think that that's a bad thing. I think that those kind of descriptor words could have worked out really well for me. I just never cared. I didn't feel like I was pulled into the story in any way by anything that was happening. And I got so frustrated, especially toward the halfway mark, when there would be little things in the story that would kind of tease like the larger world conflict, or like here's the heart of why things are not great in this book. But they were always so distant that they never... And I wanted them to be explored more. And instead, I spent a lot of time in a very slice of life, kind of high school sort of like, I don't know. It was not what I was hoping it would be, and I did not really enjoy myself through this book. And I don't know that every book, especially when it's exploring some deep themes, which this book definitely is, needs to be like, oh, I just was entertained so much by that book. That's not what I'm looking for. Honestly, in most of my reads, I don't demand to be entertained by my reads, but I just didn't care. I didn't connect with what Ishiguro was trying to portray here. The themes I definitely think are incredibly important. The way that it was executed just was really boring and dull, in my opinion. So that was a big disappointment for me as well, because I've been really looking forward to trying Ishiguro's work. I will say, however, I still have The Remains of the Day by him on my shelf, which I do intend to read. And I also want to read The Buried Giant, and I think the other one is The Pale View of Hills. So I don't think that this is going to be my last Ishiguro read by any means. I just think that this one particularly didn't land with me the way I was hoping it would. So there you guys have it. Those are a few of my biggest disappointments of the year. There were a couple of books that I didn't talk about that I gave 1 stars this year. Clear by Karis Davies and 24 Shadows by... I can't remember the author's name now that I'm sitting here on the spot. You know, there were some other books like that I gave 1 star that were just absolutely awful, awful books. But I didn't really feel disappointed by those because I don't think I expected them to be great going in. Clear is one that taught me a very important lesson, that I need to research books a little bit more before I buy them or read them, because as much as I like to go into books blind, Clear is a perfect example of why I don't do that to that extent, where I know nothing and I just pick up the book and start reading. That was a bad choice. I hated that book so much that I literally forgot to include it in my monthly wrap up because I had like already cleared it from my memory completely. So anyways, there were some of those, but I wanted to talk more about the books that I was, you know, were either in a world I already loved or books that were highly anticipated, because I think that I had more to say about those. So anyways, those are some of my biggest disappointments from 2025, and I'm so excited in the next couple of weeks to be able to tell you guys about the books that I absolutely loved, because that's my favorite part of the year. And honestly, for all of you guys that are doing, here's my top books of 2025, I know I harp on this every year, I'm going to do it again. For those of you that are like, it's December 10th, here's my favorite books of the year, do you all like not read the last 3 weeks of the year? I don't understand. I don't get it. I will be letting you guys know my favorite books of the year after December 31st, because you never know. The last book of the year might be my favorite. But anyways, I hope you guys are having a phenomenal week. I hope you are reading some 5-star reads, and I will see you in the next video.